Looking to see what's happening around your home? Ring's battery doorbell helps you track packages and see who's at your door in real time. The Outdoor Cam Plus protects your yard at night with a wide field of view and clearer Retinal 2K video. Or upgrade to 4K cameras and doorbells with Retinal Vision for ultra-clear zoom and detail. Your door, your yard, your home. With Ring, it's protected. Shop cameras, doorbells, and more at ring.com now.
There were dikes everywhere. My friend used to call it Mayberry. Like, it just felt like a small town of dikes. And of course, there were other people there too, but you just knew all the dikes.
What's the proximity to Dyke Heights and then the Renee Good shooting?
4 very short blocks over to Oakland Avenue. And we're 1 block from Powderhorn Park, which was Mecca. And it still is. I mean, you know, I was reading that Stephen Miller said, pick that neighborhood. Those people will really piss everyone off and we can have an insurrection. Those people, because it is the activist. Powderhorn and a few other neighborhoods are really the activist neighborhood for everything, but also super, super dikey still to this day. Very dikey.
And still super activism focused.
Yeah,
cool.
like when ICE was abducting people, there were whistles and horns within 2 minutes in Powderhorn, whereas in the suburbs, it would be 7 minutes. There were just so many people ready to roll. Absolutely. George Floyd was murdered 1 street over from where we lived. I mean, it's all very close. Minneapolis is a very small town. I mean, it's so weird. Now when friends come to town, they want to see all these horrible murder sites. But like, I drive by them all the time. My favorite sandwich shop is next door to where Alex Preddy was killed. I mean, that's just how you get around here.
Have you ever thought about why Minneapolis seems to be such a hotspot of radical resistance? Well, this is Cruising Podcast. My name is Sarah Gabrielli, and I started to look into it this year when the federal government deployed 3,000 ICE agents to harass the people of Minneapolis and eventually killed 2 civilians, Renee Good and Alex Preddy. As it turns out, the shooting of Renee Good occurred just a few blocks from the 2020 murder of George Floyd. This isn't a coincidence, and neither are the continued examples of Minneapolis rising up against law enforcement. Minneapolis has a long history of resistance dating back to 1800s indigenous uprisings, followed by labor movements and civil rights struggles. So I reached out to a contact of mine at the LGBTQ History Archive at UMN to see if I could interview a local about the history of queer organizing, as well as what's happening on the ground today. That's how I was introduced to our guest, Meg Riley. Meg is a longtime organizer, advocate, and Unitarian Universalist Minister. Meg first moved to the Twin Cities in 1976. She very quickly started living in cooperative community housing, and in 1981 moved into what would become Sweet Willa, a cooperatively owned lesbian home. That's part of what she's here to talk about, along with the activist work that surrounded her and her peers at the time, the unique sense of community in Minneapolis, and the current political situation. Keep in mind, though, this interview was recorded in early April, so her report is only current to that point. As this episode airs, we will be 2 weeks away from the release of our book, The Lesbian Bar Chronicles, which you can order anywhere books are sold or at our website, cruisingpod.com/book. We're also doing something pretty cool for our book tour, in my opinion. On some of our stops, we'll be hosting queer community story shares, where you can submit a 1 to 5 minute story, and if selected, you'll read it at the event to be taped for an episode of Cruising. You can find all of the details on this and our book tour schedule at our website, cruisingpod.com, or on Instagram or Facebook at cruisingpod. And I will say, for any New Yorkers, our Ginger's launch event is fast approaching, so you'll want to get in those stories ASAP. This is actually going to be our last regular interview episode of Season 3. We have a couple of special episodes to come, and I'll be getting promptly started on the search for more incredible Season 4 guests. We are not going anywhere for long, don't worry about that. But now it's time to learn more about Meg Riley and Sweet Willa and Radical Minneapolis.
people here are joiners. People here are voters. People here, I think we vote more than anyone else in the country. We have caucuses for all the elections, not just primaries. It's a cultural reality that is still true. When I moved away for 15 years, I moved back in 2004. And the first thing I did when I moved back was that George Bush was president and his Secretary of Education got really mad because this PBS show had this little aardvark or something, no, a rabbit named Buster going to visit lesbians. And so Bush's Secretary of Education canceled the funding for it. And so I said, just in a little church email group, I said, hey, this has now become a public event. We should have a public screening of the Buster show. I was picturing like a screen in the church basement. Before I knew it, we've rented a theater that holds 800 people. We've got the mayor giving the keys to the city to a rabbit. We've got the PBS person coming in. And I keep saying, wait, how's anyone going to know about this? Like, it's before social media, right? I'm like, we've got to advertise. We've got to tell people. And everyone's like, oh, no, they know. And I'm like, how do they know? And they're like, they know. It was packed. We had to turn away like 400 people. And it was like preschools told preschools. Minneapolis has felt so rich because in DC, I had been in DC for 10 years. There would have been 45 people there. And we would have advertised. We would have paid for advertisement. But people would have been like, oh, that's not a priority. But here, getting together is a huge priority. Still is. I think it's partly the cold. I mean, I think that having it be so cold here, we really know that we need each other in a way that's just life or death. But yeah, that was my first organizing thing here. And I was like, I am not in DC anymore, because I'd been doing national level organizing in DC. And I was like, no, this is what got me to do national organizing. And I'm so happy to be back here again. And that's part of what everybody saw with the surge, is that depth of community.
Where do you think it like, it sounds like you're coming into a city that already has this, right? Did it start with labor organizing? Like, it's okay if you don't have an answer, but
there are a million. There's that amazing labor story where the rich people came out with clubs and the laborers just beat the shit out of them during a strike. It does go back to the 30s. The reason we don't have the Democrats, we have the DFL, the Democratic Farmer Labor, is because of the work that the farmers did with the unions way back. And it does go really deep. The co-ops started back in the 30s. And the farmers all do co-ops. And there's a huge Finnish community that is unfortunately no longer. It was a bunch of socialists from Finland that lived up north. But that bowling alone guy, Robert Bella, who wrote Habits of the Heart, and he talked about how no one was joining bowling leagues anymore. They were just bowling with a friend or by themselves. He directly ties that to fascism, that people are not connected to one another. And that's not true here. And I wanted to say this about Minneapolis, and partly why the community was so deep. There was a huge non-drinking culture here. So it was chemically free. The coffeehouse was chemically free. There were several lesbian recovery places. There was one whole lesbian collective that moved up from North Carolina to all go to alcoholism treatment together. So that whole 12-step world is one of helping each other out and being vulnerable and being real. And that was a huge part of what was building. That's why the Women's Coffee House started, because women wanted to be with other lesbians, but not have to be in a drinking environment. And then at women's festivals, the Minneapolis women would be like, hey, we need a chemically free zone here so that we can sit with each other and people aren't drunk around us. And so that was a huge, deep part of the culture here. And when I first moved here with my friend, we'd drink because we didn't know what else to do, but I'd never been like super alcohol oriented. But a whole lot of women got sober here. moved here specifically to get sober. And that was a huge part of the women's coffee house. We didn't talk about it. There just wasn't alcohol there. But for people that I know who got sober, they were like, it was so easy to do because I didn't have to choose between steeling myself to being around alcohol or not being around lesbians. And so that was a huge piece of it, of the depth of the culture, I think, is that people came here for very vulnerable and personal reasons. I didn't, but a lot of people did. A lot of lesbians did. And so that's what the coffee house was. It was a place where newly sober, but also just, mostly young. Like they had a group for older lesbians and it was 30 and up. So most of us were in our 20s, we're dancing to disco all night.
Okay, let's rewind for a second before we get more into all of that. So first, how did you end up in the Twin Cities?
I went to college out in Portland, Oregon, and a friend of mine said, hey, do you want to move to the Twin Cities when we're done? And I had no plan whatsoever about what I might want to do, but I used to like the Mary Tyler Moore Show, and that took place in the Twin Cities, and there was a chubby, funny character named Rhoda Morgenstern on it, and I thought maybe she'd be my friend. Not really, but I just thought maybe people like her would be in Minneapolis. Chubby, meaning like 5 pounds more than super skinny, but at the time, that was what you got. So anyway, I said sure, and we moved to St. Paul and lived with my friend's cousin for a while. And I thought, here I am in St. Paul. And I had this plan, like a young adult would have, that I would live there for 3 months, see if I liked it. If I didn't, I'd move on to Boston. Well, in 3 months, I'd barely gotten a job. I had borrowed money for a damage deposit, which I had just paid back. I couldn't move. So I thought, I'm going to be here for a while. I didn't particularly like it. It was insanely cold, but I was lonely too. So I decided to look for cooperative house. Now, that summer, when I still lived in the apartment, this big old lesbian came to visit from Portland. And I didn't think I was a lesbian. I just thought I was kind of asexual. Jennifer Camper, she's a cartoonist. She's still around. She's featured in this lesbian cartoon thing that PBS just did last year. Anyway, she came to town and she treated me like a lesbian. She just decided to assume that I was.
Was she a friend of a friend?
Yeah, friends of friends from college. Friends of friends when you're a young adult is everything. So we hung out, and I did not get involved with her because she had a girlfriend back in Portland. Not that that would have stopped her. She was not at all monogamous, but I was like, no, I would like it too much and you'll leave and you have a girlfriend. So, but it did make me realize, who knew,
So was that the first time that you thought that about yourself or questioned that kind of thing?
I had questioned it forever, but I couldn't imagine it. I'd think my life would just make so much more sense if I was a lesbian, but I'm not. And then what happened first, before she came to town, I read this book called Beyond God the Father by Mary Daly, who talked about women's space and women connecting. And I read that. I found it in a bookstore in St. Paul. I sat down on the floor, read the whole book. And when it was done, I said, oh my God, I'm a lesbian. But it was just in my mind. It wasn't in my body. It was like, it makes sense now. I have a frame to actually fit it into.
Was the Mary Tyler Moore thing gay at all for you? Is Rhoda kind of a gayish character?
Mary and Rhoda were both single and they hung out all the time. One thing that I tell young people is you just can't imagine how absent any reflection of us was. I mean, in Minneapolis, when I did come out, all we had was Dykes to watch out for. Alison Bechdel lived here, and she was writing about our community, and her cartoons really, and Jeb's photographs, that was about all we had. But when I was trying to figure out who I could be, there was absolutely, the only media you saw was really creepy pedophiles. And, if there were two women in love, one of them would always die or go to a man. I mean, there was just nothing to say, oh, in a positive way, that's who I am. There just wasn't. So, yeah, I think once you have that, you can't imagine not having it. Although God knows they're trying to get us back to that time now, but we've had it. So you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. But at the time, I'd thought about it a lot because my life didn't make sense. I didn't like the boys, and I just thought I was asexual.
Do you have any like specific memories of that coming to a head for you?
Well, I was a Girl Scout. I joined the Girl Scouts when everyone else was leaving as a teenager, when it was not a cool thing to do at all. But I thought hanging out with girls at that age felt great. And we went camping and canoeing and did all the things my family didn't do. And one time we were at this Girl Scout camp, and there was an older troop there. We were in 8th grade. They were in 9th grade or something, 9th, 10th, like that. And we were dancing. And I remember we were dancing to Paul Simon's Cecilia. And I was so excited about it. Like, everyone else was like, we want to go to bed. And I was like, go to bed? What? Like, so, and people that knew me then have said, you didn't know you were a lesbian? God, I did. But I really didn't want to know it, truthfully. Adrienne Rich has a line, what is unspoken becomes unspeakable. And I couldn't imagine it. I didn't grow up with homophobia or, I wasn't in a fundamentalist family. We were Unitarians. It was all good, but I just couldn't imagine it. There was nothing positive to imagine.
Yeah. I mean, this is something we talk about all the time on the podcast. The like very, very real tangible impact of representation. And I think that people can at least relate to this idea of like, if something isn't represented for you, whatever it is, you can't wrap your head around it.
That's why Beyond God the Father was so important to me. It was a feminist more radical than me. I never had read anything that seemed more radical. I always just felt like I was hanging on the edge of something. So to have somebody who went further than I did gave me a landing place. And I'm so grateful forever for that book for that reason. Because it was one of the first that I'd never heard the word patriarchy. I'd never heard about how the Virgin Mary became a virgin. And, I didn't know any of that stuff that I think is more available to people now. We didn't have answering machines. We didn't have internet. We didn't, you were just kind of on your own to figure.
No, totally. But so you always had innately sort of radical ideas in the sense that you were like on that end of the spectrum?
Yeah. Feminist. I always had feminist. And when I came out, it was the concept was lesbian feminist. It wasn't queer. I came out as a lesbian feminist, and those were my primary identities. I was in groups that were straight women too, but they were radical feminists.
So as radical lesbian feminists, there was more of a kinship and connection to straight radical feminists than to other like gay male radicals.
Because we were talking about violence against women. We were talking about rape. We were talking about sexism at work. We were talking about things that really impacted lesbians as well as straight women. And that was who we were. That was what we were looking at. Like Women Against Violence Against Women, which was one of the groups that I got super involved with after I came out. There were straight women in there. There were a lot of women who came out in there too. But I mean, date rape wasn't a thing. You just had a bad date. I mean, it's really a song like Brandi Carlile's The Joke, where she's claiming a strong woman. And I feel like she understands. I've never heard her say I'm a lesbian feminist, but she's claiming women along with the lesbian identity in a way that feels important to me, because violence against all women, including, of course, transgender women, but all women, is still rampant, and murders and all these things that we were marching and fighting and, lobbying about.
Yeah, and I think some of our richest communities are women's spaces. And I mean that in like a trans inclusive way,
Mm-hmm.
but women's softball leagues. And we did an episode about the Jane Collective, which was a bunch of women, majority straight, that did all of these underground, safe, caring abortions.
Mm-hmm.
Our roots as women, that really is infused into the lesbian identity.
Yes. And there is a courage that comes from I know women who are monogamously married to cisgender men, but say I'm queer. That's who I am. And that's fine, except my life, I've never had a man to hide behind. I mean, I could dredge one up and lie, but I've never, with a broken down car, any situation I've been in, I have not been able to reference a man and get power from that. And that's what I think lesbians have learned about power from living that way with no end in sight, So I am grateful to your podcast because I do feel like there is lesbian erasure, and it's partly we set that up by not ever wanting anybody to see us back when that wasn't safe. And lesbians are particularly bad about passing it along. Like PBS did a special here about the gay lesbian people in Minnesota back in the 70s and 80s. And I went with my friend and I was like, that was so male. Well, what did they look at? They looked at media. We hated media. Media was patriarchal. We weren't going to be in the media. We just knew each other. And we were very protective of who we were. And so no one learned the stories. How could they? We didn't want to share them.
So where in the story you had just met the lesbian cartoonist.
Yeah.
And that is an eye-opening thing for you.
Yeah. And so I started looking for more of that. And so I found this house in St. Paul called Brownstone that was looking for housemates. And it looked to me like it was a bunch of lesbians. And when my friend came from Portland to help me paint, she was visiting. She said, this house looks like a bunch of lesbians. And I said, I hope so. But it turned out it was a bunch of us that were just right on the edge of coming out. And it was men too. It was, it was everybody. It was 11 people. It had been there since the 60s. And then a friend of mine from work who was a lesbian broke up with her partner and she moved in. And she was the first one who actually came in as a lesbian. And then there was a women's bookstore called Amazon Books. And there was a newsletter in it called So's Your Old Lady. And at the top of it, it said free for lesbians. And I would go there and I would stare at it. And I was terrified that if I picked it up, the dyke cashier would go, put that down. You're not a lesbian, So I just stare longingly at it. And I'd kind of read what I could standing there, but I'd never pick it up. And then I went there with this woman from the house who ended up being my first female lover, who also was involved with 2 men at the time. And that's partly why she was safe for me. I knew it wouldn't get super deep or serious and I could just test out if I liked it or not, which I did. So we went and she picked one up and no one yelled at her. And I thought, well, I'm at least as much of a lesbian as she is. So I picked it up too. And that was a huge moment for me. Like, I guess I get to have this.
Do you think that sign, Free for Lesbians, was its purpose to liberate people to claim the identity, or did it just happen to play out like that?
I think that's what I'm saying about how protective we were then. Like, I don't want straight women looking at this. Don't look at it. I don't want other people to see this. And so it was like, this is for us. There was a real sense that we got what we got, we got Alison Bechdel. She was ours. No one else got what we got, and we didn't get what anybody else got. It was porous. The border was porous because hippies and, there were all kinds of other communities, but we were very protective. And I'm sure the people who did that newsletter, I don't think they were separatists, although lesbian separatism did become a big thing in Minneapolis. And there was later a paper that was explicitly separatist. But I think they just didn't want other people to get a free thing that lesbians made. I don't think we had language about emotional labor or anything yet, but I think that's what they were getting at.
Did you go and interview to live in the housing? Is there sort of a process? Because they have to approve someone, right?
Yeah, I went and I interviewed and I learned about how they operated. Some people really hated how the house operated. It really worked for me. Like I said, it had been there since the 60s. Some people who studied B.F. Skinner had lived there. I guess he taught here for a while. And so they had set up a couple systems which we used throughout all of the evolution of the house. One was a labor credit system where you had to get 16 labor credits a month. You could decide what you wanted to do. The jobs nobody wanted, cleaning the bathroom being the main one, that was the highest. That was 3 credits an hour. And the ones that were like kind of lightweight, like dusting, those were 1 credit an hour. So if something bugged you, you got your labor credits by doing that. And if you didn't get 16 labor credits, you paid. Not much, but you paid. And mostly it was a psychological thing. You didn't want to be down. And if you got too many labor credits, the house paid you. And towards the end of the month, the bathrooms were always very clean because everyone was quickly trying to make their labor credits. But, some people would come over and see on the refrigerator, there was a grid with everybody's name and their credits. And some people were just appalled by that. But I liked it because having had a lot of housemates, it's like, it's your job to empty the trash. Why is the trash, But if it's like the trash bothers you, empty it and get some labor credits for it. So I really found that to be a radical and freeing way to do labor. And the other system was there was a sign-in, sign-out meal board. So we ate together. Someone cooked every night. And if you were going to be there, you were fine. If you needed to sign out, you signed out. If you were bringing a guest, you said plus guest. And so people who were cooking knew how many people they were cooking for. So we had 7 nights a week, we had dinner, and then Sunday we had brunch. So food was included in what you paid every month. I mean, it's really stunning to say that when I moved in, it was $160 a month for food, utilities, and living in basically a mansion.
I knew you were going to say something crazy like that, but I didn't know it was going to be that crazy.
It's not crazy. I mean...
And you had your own room?
Yes. And minimum wage at the time was about $3. So that meant if you worked 60 hours, half of a month, you had everything paid for. And so then the rest of whatever you made, because I was working minimum wage at that point, the rest of what you made, you could do whatever. Minneapolis is where co-ops, there were dozens and dozens of neighborhood co-ops, food co-ops at the time. Where we lived, we could pick from 3 of them easily. If you volunteered there, you could get a 20% discount on all your food. So that was part of what you could get labor credits for. But it was a time of downward mobility. Everyone did not expect to have a car, a TV, a stereo. We shared everything. I think there were 2 cars in the house, and whoever grocery shopped would borrow one to do it. And the rest of us biked and bussed and walked. And, we didn't have stuff. That really came in with Reagan in the 80s, like this thing of having more stuff. And so it was a much simpler, we ate beans and rice. Like we weren't eating meat. It was before you knew vegetarian food could taste good. Everything was kind of gray and brown. And anyway, but we thought it was great. We felt good about it. And, if you used cheese, you had to apply to get to use cheese because it was expensive. And it'd be like, Mary, you used the cheese last week. We had house meeting every Sunday too. So we'd be like, Mary, you've used the cheese 3 weeks in a row. Someone else gets to use it. I mean, it was a simple time, I'm telling you. Mutual aid was how we lived every day. It was very just expected that if you had a car, it was everybody's car. There was one TV set. Everybody would go to that house and watch TV. That was just daily life. That wasn't called anything special. But then there were times, or if it snowed a lot, we'd all shovel each other's houses. Or, if somebody was told by the city they had to cut down some weeds, we'd all go help, or paint their house, or things like that. But there were 2 things I thought of that were extraordinary. One was when one of the women who had MS was taking steroids and they caused a psychotic break. And she really was out of her mind. And we had a vigil. I mean, her partner went through and called everybody and just had somebody there all the time with her. And she did end up in a psych ward, but we really didn't trust psych wards at all for lesbians. And so we really were trying not to do that. But if somebody needed something like that, or they had breast cancer and needed meals or any of that kind of stuff, it automatically happened. The other one was a friend. They had an organic basil farm, and she accidentally cut her thumb off. And so they couldn't plant she couldn't do a lot of things for a while, although they reattached her thumb and she's okay. So we would all go out and plant, and they were like out in the country. They weren't even in Minneapolis, but it was like if somebody was in trouble, everyone gathered around immediately. No question. It was just automatic. But every single day, you just relied on other people. You just did. I wish everyone could experience that you're never alone, that there's always going to be somebody there having your back. And if somebody was, got fired or whatever, everybody would pitch in money or, it just was so automatic.
Yeah, that I will say that is how a lot of people in my community operate.
Good.
Maybe not as, I feel inspired by the work points system. I think that's a cool way to do it. But a lot of what you're saying like feels very familiar to me. And I don't think I know it's not common at all. But especially the community that I have in East Hampton,
well, that area
does mirror that.
That area is very thick. It always has been. Lesbianville, USA. I have a ton of friends in that area. And yeah, it is very similar. It's smaller than Minneapolis. It's not a big city. But yeah, there is that sense of we're in it together. But what I was going to say is the first day that I did the interview, and then one of the women who came out later but hadn't yet said, the day you move in, New Year's Day, 1979, Holly Near and Meg Christian are coming to the women's coffeehouse. Would you like to go? I had no idea who Holly Near was, who Meg Christian was, what the women's coffeehouse was. And I said, oh, absolutely. Yes, I would like to go. So I went, and it was that room full that I'd been waiting my whole life to be in. It was back when Holly and Meg were a couple. And it was astonishing. The music, the women. I just thought, oh, I've moved to heaven. Like, this is it. This is just it. So that was day one in that house. And even though the women hadn't come out, everybody was on our process, I'd say.
Was there intermingling of housemates?
Yeah, some of those women are still my very best friends in the world. We don't live in the same place, most of us, but I think of it as my pod. I kind of came out with them. We saw each other through some pretty wacky stuff, with those first relationships. And when I look back, it was a bunch of femmes. It was really interesting how femmy the lesbian energy was. And so there wasn't sexual tension between us. There was just deep friendship building. That was in January. Then in April, we're over in St. Paul on Summit Avenue, where the governor lives, this big 11-bedroom house.
And how common at this point are you hearing about a lot of other living situations like this? Like culturally, was that a really big thing?
It was culturally, but I wouldn't say I was particularly connected to it. I more was just insular in that house because it was so new. But then in April, the landlord said, I'm selling the house. I'm making it into condos. You got to move. And a bunch of us were really pissed about that and decided to buy a house cooperatively. Because as I said, there were co-ops everywhere. There was a bike co-op. There were all these food co-ops. There was a clothing co-op. There was a bakery co-op. Everybody was co-oping. And it was a way to co-own things. So we decided to buy a house cooperatively. 7 of us decided we would do that. The deal was that in order to be in, you had to come up with $1,500. And some of the people had that. I hit up a rich guy I knew in college to borrow it because I asked my parents and they were like, absolutely not. That's a terrible idea. You will lose that money. No. So I asked this rich guy I knew from college and borrowed it from him. So we got together like $10,000 and we found a house in Powderhorn neighborhood in Minneapolis, a 7-bedroom house that cost $59,000. I know. It's just so horrifying. It pains me to even give the numbers, but they're real. So then our payments went up every month to $200 for everything because we were also paying back the rich guy who lent us money. But we kept on with the same house, labor credits and structures. And we didn't know we were moving, although the one lesbian who'd moved there said, "Oh my God, we're moving where all the lesbians live." And I was like, "Oh, good." She was like, "Oh, we'll just be like everyone else." And I was like, "Oh, yay." So that's when I learned about the much bigger world of so many lesbians and other people were living collectively. I don't know anybody else who bought a house cooperatively the way we did. That was unique to us. But just down the block, there was a lesbian collective. I mean, there was a block called Dyke Heights over on Oakland Avenue, which is one block from Portland where Renee Good was murdered. And that just was chock full of lesbians. And of course, we didn't even have answering machines. We certainly didn't have cell phones to text each other. So we just dropped into each other's houses all the time or called, but if someone wasn't home, you didn't get them. So it was a very different time. And we moved there. By then, I'd fallen in love with a woman who I met through Women Against Violence Against Women work. All the women started coming out is what happened. And then the men started moving out. And at some point, it was Larry and 6 lesbians in the house.
So in the original house, there were a few straight guys there that then came with you?
Yeah, there were 3 straight men and 5 women. And so we had named the house Sweet William because that flower grew there. But then I remember going to one of the lesbians and one of the other collectives said to me, "Doesn't the name Sweet William offend your lesbian sensibility?" So we changed it to Sweet Willa.
You weren't on the Dyke Heights block.
Yeah.
But you were in the same neighborhood, like near there.
There were dykes everywhere. And the house, I mean, within a year, it was all lesbians there, but there were always what we called fixtures. That was like friends and lovers and people who just came and hung out there. So it was always just this really dykey intersection. And people would come and hang out when we weren't even home. They'd just come and hang out with each other. It just became a real community space.
You are involved with a woman at this point and you're saying everyone's coming out, but then I know that there's a story of you sort of practicing like publicly claiming being a lesbian. Is that different? Does that come much later?
Oh, well, yes, that came after Reagan came in. I was part of a lesbian empowerment group, which was 2 of the women in the house and me and a couple other women. But we said, it's just hard to come out in just really normal places. So let's just practice. So we went to a shopping mall and we paired up and pretended to be partners, then called lovers, which my kid finds gross, but that's what we called people. And so we would go like, "Hi, my lover and I want to buy a couch." Like we just were practicing, just like, "I want to give my lover a ring." Like, and what we learned very quickly is people just wanted to sell us shit. Like, people like the salespeople. By the end, I just remember this other woman, Eleanor, and I were like literally chasing the salesperson, going, "My lover." So we were just trying to break the sound barrier in situations where we would in ourselves where no one had told us we had to. So we just wanted to practice. But that was a couple years later. That was very fun, though. Maybe not at Chick-fil-A or something, but the rest of them just won't fail. So, anyway.
Starting or growing your own business can be intimidating and lonely at times. Your to-do list may feel endless with new tasks, and lists can easily begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything as a built-in business partner can be a game changer. For millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names like Gymshark, Rare Beauty, and Heinz, to brands just getting started. Shopify has hundreds of ready-to-use templates that can help you build a beautiful online store that matches your brand's style. And you can tackle all the important tasks in one place, from inventory to payments to analytics and more. No need to save multiple websites or try to figure out what platform is hosting the tool that you need. And if people haven't heard about your brand, you can get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you, with easy-to-run email and social media campaigns. to reach customers wherever they're scrolling or strolling. Start your business today with the industry's best business partner, Shopify, and start hearing. Sign up for your $1 per month trial today at shopify.com/realm. Go to shopify.com/realm. That's shopify.com/realm.
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Here's a little tune to help you remember. Same drive, different day. Don't you wish you were getting away? Pack your bags and come on through. Texas, Ohio, Alaska, we're up there too. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Well, I hope you like my little song. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Hi, listeners. We want to tell you about a podcast we love. It's called Rebel Girls, formerly known as Goodnight Stories for Rebel Girls. It's about real-life women who are changing the world with their courage, creativity, and big, bold ideas. Want to know how Taylor Swift became a superstar? Or hear how Simone Biles became the greatest athlete of all time? From immersive stories to heartfelt interviews to super smart advice, Rebel Girls brings you stories that will get you fired up to become your best self. There are over 400 episodes for you to explore, with new episodes every week. So check it out. Listen to Rebel Girls wherever you get your podcasts. And find us on youtube.com/rebelgirls. And whatever you do, stay rebel.
Welcome to Mick Unplugged, the #1 podcast for self-improvement and modern leadership. I'm Mick Hunt, your host, and I'm here to challenge your why and fuel your because. This is where leaders, entrepreneurs, and go-getters come to level up. Each week, I bring you unfiltered conversations, game-changing strategies, and the kind of motivation that transforms lives and legacies. I've learned from legends like Les Brown, Damon John, and Robert Irvine. And now, I'm bringing their lessons, along with mine, straight to you. From modern leadership tips to creating unstoppable momentum, this is the podcast that redefines what's possible. Hit play, subscribe, and join the millions who've made Mick Unplugged their go-to source for growth and greatness. Because your next breakthrough is just one episode away. This is Mick Unplugged, the voice and face of modern leadership, entrepreneur, and self-improvement. Let's get started.
So obviously what comes along with this lifestyle is activism. Is
Yes.
that something that you got involved with right away? Do you remember like your introduction to organizing?
Before I moved to the co-op house, the American Indian movement was in Minneapolis. It was centered in Minneapolis, partly because the FBI headquarters are in Minneapolis and the FBI was really tormenting them. But so I had gone to some stuff about treaties and Native American stuff and just been blown away by it. And so the American Friends Service Committee was doing that. That's probably the first thing I really saw and got deeply involved with. And then Women Against Violence Against Women started in the spring of '79. And so, yeah, I got really, really involved in that. What I loved about it was we did not know anything about fundraising, but we just were willing to do it. And that's what I love most about that time is that we all just tried to do things that we had absolutely no experience, no business really doing, but we were like, sure, I'm a lesbian. I can do anything. And we would just do stuff. So those became my people, and meetings all the time and silk screening T-shirts and, selling stuff. And the march happened the day we moved into the house. We moved our stuff August 1st. August 2nd was this march that I'd been working on for months and all that I was thinking of. And I still remember on Sunday morning, I sat out on the porch. There was a glider in the new house and opened the paper. And the front page was just, women take back the night. And there was this huge photo. And I just went, I'm home. I am just home.
What is the impetus of Women Against Violence Against Women? I mean, it sounds pretty self-explanatory, but like, how does this come about? What's the purpose of it?
It was a time when culturally women actually had some power. You know, Jimmy Carter had a whole women's government. I mean, we almost got free daycare. Like, there were so many things being fought for then. I think Carter really was the turning point where we could have been more like Northern Europe, and we turned towards where we are now, especially with Reagan, of privatization and greed. But rape was really, raping your wife wasn't a crime. Beating your wife wasn't a crime. But it's when like rape crisis hotlines were starting, and really women were taking ourselves seriously enough to say, no, this is just not acceptable. And so Boston had the first Take Back the Night March. And some women here from this Quaker group called Movement for a New Society saw that and decided they wanted to do it. At the time, one of the things that all of us lesbians were doing was taking self-defense. A lot of women were starting to get black belts in karate and stuff because, as I said, we didn't have cars. We were out walking and biking all the time. So we needed protection. There was this desire to walk down the street in downtown Minneapolis where there were really sexist billboards up everywhere. And there are a whole lot of porn stores right on Chicago and Lake. They're gone now, but they, like, the suburban men would come in and use porn and then leave. And we did a whole lot of actions about the violence of pornography. So a lot of it was really, and still is, very violent against women. So yeah, it was just a time when consciousness about that was really growing. And that's where the lesbian and the feminist fit together, because somebody who's going to attack you on the street, they're not really going to ask you a lot of questions.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk more about the porn wars at the time?
I mean, my kids studied the porn wars in a class in college. I was like, oh my God, I lived through that. But Andrea Dworkin came to town in the 80s. And so there was a real disagreement about whether or not porn should be outlawed. And I was always of the opinion that if it was, queer people would be the first to go and it was a bad idea. But a lot of my friends were like, absolutely, it's evil, it needs to go. And lesbians were, I mean, really in the middle of it. And just parties you went to would get really tense. And like, I moved away from here for 15 years and I moved back and I saw someone on the street I barely remembered. And I said, hey, and she just scowled at me and walked away. And I thought, I think we're on opposite sides of porn wars. I mean, it was emotional for people because it was about safety, you know, and we were showing slideshows of some of the worst porn, you know, which was like women were dying in it and, you know, really being abused. None of us wanted that. But the real difference came to, should the government regulate what porn is? And when they did, in Canada, I still remember the first thing they raided was a gay men's bookstore. That's why I just thought, I don't want the government in on this. They're not going to do it. They're not going to help. So, but yeah, it was a huge thing. And it cracked me up that they're now studying it as like a, so there was a lot of weird stuff that happened here. But yeah, Andrea Dworkin coming to town was very polarizing.
What were some of the actions that surrounded that?
There was a billboard improvement team that would go spray paint billboards, even just sexist billboards, but especially the creepy ones for the porn stores. Also, some women, they made up bumper stickers that said, I like violence against women. And they would put them on cars at the porn stores, which, I mean, so there was some pretty creative stuff going on. It was a time of just get involved. And then when Reagan came in, there was so much about nuclear war that we got deeply involved in. That's how my lesbian empowerment group came together. Actually, it was to do street theater about nuclear war, because we'd been doing street theater about violence against women. Like, we would just go to a laundromat and just start doing skits about domestic violence. I'm sure the women in the laundromat were just dying to see us. But anyway, we had someone who blew a bugle, and we were just all about just taking up space and declaring ourselves. we had these shirts that just said Women Against Violence Against Women. They were black with white letters. And we would go to we would go anywhere until we were kicked out. Grocery stores. We loved the laundromat because there were bored people there. Street corners. And we would get together and make up skits about violence against women. And some of them were short, so we wouldn't get kicked out before they were over. And some of them were longer. One of the short ones was just a guy putting his hand on a woman's ass. I mean, it was obviously another woman, and the woman just lifting up the arm and going, "Whose hand is this? I found it on my ass." So it was things like that. We would do stuff like that too on buses. I mean, because once you do it in theater, then you get more empowered to do it in life. One woman, Sheila, would make up these goofy songs like, "Everything today is thoroughly violent." I mean, so I would sing these little songs. And I mean, it was fun. It was really fun. And most people were not thrilled to see us, whether they were shopping at the grocery store. I don't remember anyone ever saying, "Oh, thank you for that." But, we just felt like being really vocal about things like rape and domestic violence, because no one was, felt liberating to us.
I know a big part of the community at the time was the Les Eats Breakfast Collective.
Yeah. It was on Sundays, we got this restaurant that's still there called Modern Times. It's run by anarchists now, but it's still collectively run. But it was, at the time, it was a real restaurant, except Sunday morning they would let us have it. And again, it's the kind of thing where you just would say, "Sure, I'll do that," without, "What do I know about running a restaurant?" We would go over there at about 5 a.m. and, put a bunch of potatoes in the oven. And, probably 100 lesbians would come through every week and we would get, croissants from the lesbian bakery and tofu. And I mean, no meat, but it was a gathering spot. And I think what's hard to communicate is how thick the community felt. Because, as I said, you didn't have online community. It was all the thickness of face-to-face. So Friday and Saturday night, most weeks, I would go to the women's coffeehouse to dance. And before the dancing, which was disco, there would always be a local performer singing sappy love songs that she wrote or she got from, some lesbian singer. And we'd all love that. And because it would be some friend of a friend. And then we would all just dance. And then we would bike home. And so that was Friday and Saturday night. And then Sunday nights at the coffee house, some group who wanted to present to the rest of everyone would come, and there'd be some kind of a panel or a lecture or something. So I remember one from Jewish lesbians and depressed lesbians and Black lesbians and differently able lesbians. And there was a lot of shaming involved usually, but, we all wanted to learn. And so we would listen to each other, and it was a deepening place. It meant a lot to me to go to those because it's where people would tell you what you didn't know about who they were. You didn't have to stretch at all to find people. And the house was my home base for knowing other lesbians. But then, like I said, all these women would come through, and then the different, one woman would be super into canoe trips. So I'd meet all the canoe dykes, and there'd be softball dykes, and, all these different dyke communities that were
canoe dykes, depressed dykes. Was there a lot of infighting the way that queer people sometimes do? Like, is that something that was a huge part of the community, was kind of like holding each other accountable in these sort of
We were learning. When I lived at the house, no, it absolutely wasn't. And I was the first one out. It got uglier after I left. And I ended up throwing my lot in with Unitarian Universalist churches because I wanted an institution that would hold through time, because so many of the lesbian things that I did, we just got tired of doing them and we stopped. So let's not do that anymore. The house, we did not pass on leadership well. We did not think about it. We didn't pass along the vision well enough. Women Against Violence Against Women, after 2 marches that I was involved in, the third year, a bunch of us left and started a basketball team. And the women who were there, again, we didn't pass leadership on well, and they got into huge fights, predictably enough, about racism. Bunch of white women fighting about racism. And they almost weren't going to have a march. And so some of us who had been involved went back and got re-involved. But the House, it was just sad. One of the really cool things that happened is this working class butch moved in, and she said, I don't like this thing where some of you bought into the House and some of us didn't, so you kind of own it more than we do. So I think we should up from $200 to $250 and start paying you back every month. And they did. And so the House would have owned itself. I mean, like, it would have owned itself if it had kept going. But instead, some women came in, they didn't get along, so they didn't fill it. So they started just using, I mean, it just was really sad to me. And I really do now value so much passing on leadership and vision and purpose and all of that in a way that both with Women Against Violence Against Women and the House, it was kind of like, oh, I'm done. Okay, I'm leaving. And I just don't think you get to do that. You know, that's something I know in hindsight that I didn't know at the time. And the Women's Coffeehouse eventually went down. I mean, none of the things. The Women's Bookstore went down.
How did you end up, like, why were you the first one to leave?
I thought it would be a good idea to have my sweetheart move into the house, which we didn't do, but we needed a housemate. We interviewed this guy who was like, I'd come, but I want my partner to come. And I was like, wait, hold on. If his partner could come, why couldn't my sweetie come? She moved in and she promptly fell in love with someone else in the house. And the house suddenly was not a place of deep joy or ease for me. I would say in hindsight, I sort of had a nervous breakdown. And so they both moved out, but still the house just felt like off. Even though the people who were there were super supportive and, you know, absolutely my friends, it felt lonelier to be there because by then most of them were very happily in relationships, for one thing. But for another thing, my idealism had just really crashed and burned. I really did need to just go read and, you know, do art and, you know, find myself.
So this was like the first lover.
This was my first, like, oh my God, I'm in love. This is it. Oh, this will be it forever. Oh, the patriarchy, we're going to take it down. You know, like all my idealism about who women are and what we can do and all of that just fell to pieces. I'll tell you the interesting, when you get old, things go round. So she went off with this other woman in the house, and I, in typical 1982, was like, I think she killed me in a past life. You know, she's my mortal enemy. And then Kendrick and I re-met in 1990 and got back together. And so we were together. We had a kid together. We were together for almost 20 years. And she had chronic fatigue and the relationship was challenging. So she moved to live by herself because she really couldn't get out of bed. She was very, very sick. So Anne, this woman she'd left me for, my mortal enemy, said, if you want to move down to Asheville, North Carolina, where I live, I'll take care of you. You can just turn over your Social Security and I'll cook for you, clean for you. So she did. And I was like, Anne went from being like my mortal enemy to like, thank you. You're my hero. Thank you. And Anne nursed her till the end. So, you know, you live long enough, things surprise you. But
yeah, that's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
How did Sweet Willa end up coming to an official end?
So there weren't enough women to pay the rent, and they didn't want to get new housemates. So we just decided, okay, we're going to rent the house out while we figure out what to do. We rented the house out, but we never collected a cent. No damage deposit, no rent, not a cent. And in Minneapolis, it takes months to evict somebody who's not paying you. So for months, they lived there and didn't pay anything. And when we finally got the house back. We went in and it turned out the water had been turned off, which was our responsibility actually as the landlords, but we hadn't known it. So the water had been off for quite a while. So we were like, okay, we'll turn the water on and then we'll come back Sunday to clean. So somebody had the water, called the city, paid the bill, got the water turned on. And I was the first one there Sunday, and I opened the front door and it was raining. And it turned out that on the third floor, a faucet had been open. So for 3 days, water had just cascaded through. And it is an old house with sheetrock that's like plaster. And it just smelled horrible. And it was just drenched. The hardwood floor, everything was just drenched. Then we borrowed every dehumidifier from anybody who'd ever had one. And we had just dehumidifiers everywhere trying to dry the house. And again, we took turns having a day to go empty all the dehumidifiers. So it was my day. And I went over and I got to the front porch and the next door neighbor said, there were 5 fire engines there last night. And I said, what? And he said, oh yeah, the house was on fire. So I went in, and because the house had been so wet, it wasn't nearly as burnt as it would have been, but it was bad. I mean, it was a mess. We called the fire department. We could see footsteps up the back of the house. It felt clear to us that it was arson, because I think what they did is come in, turn on the stove to try to keep warm, and it caught things up. That would be my guess. But they said it was just malfunction. And so they gave us I think $45,000 in insurance. And we sold the house for $19,000 to somebody who didn't take good care of it. And I still feel really sad when I see it, because you know that camping adage, like leave the campground better than you found it. It's so much worse than we found it. It was such a beautiful house. And we did not want to be putting it back together and doing all it would have taken. You know, like the beautiful hardwood floors that he just put like orange shag carpet on. It was awful. But we made the money back and we paid everybody, you know, for living there. Even the people who hadn't invested got some money from the co-op, because I think we ended up making like $5,000 on the house or something. But it was just a really sad way to end it. I still, when I drive by, I mean, people live there. It's inhabitable, but it's much funkier. It just looks like one of those sad houses physically, you know, and it was in really good shape when we lived there. So that's how the house ceased to be ours.
Someone told me it was an anarchist collective now or something.
I mean,
like
because it's so big, because it's 7 bedrooms, it's always alternative living there. Last I heard, it was an anarchist collective. It lives on. It's still like, I was driving a friend around who wanted to see all the horror spots in town. And right in front of the house, people at that time were doing a lot of things because it was on the corner, on intersections to slow ice down. So, and I could tell it was people from the house. They were having a huge party. They had a bonfire, you know, in the intersection so that you couldn't whip through it the way ice was doing. You had to drive around it carefully. And I was like, that's good to see. You know, people are still making life there. There were kids dancing and, you know, it made me really happy to see that.
So how did you end up moving back to Minneapolis?
So I moved to Boston for 5 years. Then I moved to D.C. to Tacoma Park for 10 years. And I loved both of those places, but they did not feel like they were at home. And in 2002, my then partner, I was back with a woman that I'd been with. We moved back here. And the whole time I was gone, it felt like a magnet pulling me back here. It's so funny because my kid, who's now like your age, is like, you picked this? You lived in Portland and Boston and you picked this? And I'm like, it's just home, you know? And I've loved that the world has finally seen what I love so much about it, which is the depth of neighborliness and love that's here. Because it's not as beautiful as, I don't see Mount Hood every day. You know, like there are things about it that aren't as flashy as a lot of places, but it's just home. You know, I really think the Dakota people have so much to do with why it's so deep here. And the Ojibwe people, but overwhelmingly the Dakota people, even though they were kicked out. That is their creation story here. And So the minute we got back, I was like, oh, thank God. Okay, I'm home again.
Do you feel like there was sort of a shift in 2015, I think is when the first
Yes.
like hugely public shooting happens? Can you talk about what that was like being on the ground there?
Yeah. So Jamar Clark was killed here. It was after Michael Brown in Ferguson. And there was an encampment at the precinct, and people lived there. And it became a hub. Unhoused people could go there and eat. There were fires, there were tents. I'm not saying there wasn't a little violence here and there and some ugly stuff, but mostly it was amazing. And church people were taking casseroles over there, and it went on for quite some time. My kid was one of the original people who, then a teenager, I think. I was deeply connected through that. I mean, I was watching it with my heart on my sleeve because of that, and over there a lot because of that. But it was really inspiring. I remember going to a meeting here after Michael Brown, after Ferguson, but before Jamar Clark. It was a Black Lives Matter meeting. They decided, maybe they didn't even have that name yet. I can't remember. They decided to shut down the freeway. And I'd always, I'd done like justice stuff for a living. I'd taken my kid a million places through their life, So I remember on the way home, they said, which highways have you shut down? And I said, oh, I've never shut down a highway. And I thought, because we're in different time now, we never thought, that's something I never thought of. We shut down some other stuff, but never a highway. And it just felt like the leadership, partly because it was my kid, but partly it was just like there was new leadership. There was Black leadership. There's really strong Black leadership. So that was the first real deep organizing. So I was thinking, well, what's my role now? This is not for me to lead. So I started making soup and taking it to Black Lives Matter meetings because I heard they were eating pizza all the time. It's like, well, I can make you soup, And so, just thinking about, well, what's your role now that you're old and you're white? This is not for you to lead. And I feel the same with the surge. Like, I help, I do my thing, but there's a new generation of leadership, and I'm delighted about it. And of course, all the generations were working together here. Everybody was involved, but Black Lives Matter really, it was very powerful here. And then, when George Floyd got murdered, there was already stuff in place to respond. And George Floyd Square, I mean, there have been people tending it ever since. And there's, food there and clothing there and still a vigil there. And I mean, people were living there for quite a while too. So this kind of encampment kind of response, I think, deepens relationships far beyond going to a meeting on Zoom and having some tactics that you talk about, because you really get to know people. And of course, we did that back in the day. We built a longhouse. The Native women helped us build a longhouse where Sperry Univac used to build bombs, and we camped there all winter. We took turns. So
when was that?
81, maybe. It was after Greenham Commons inspired Seneca Falls. And two of my friends and I went to Seneca Falls for the summer when that was happening. And then we got back here and we were like, well, they're building cluster bombs over at Honeywell. They're building these bombs at Sperry Univac. We should live there. So there was just this kind of right by the freeway, this lot. And we all just took shifts going over there. So when the 3rd precinct started, I was like, oh, well, this I know, There are only so many things you can do.
There's also in 2016, there's Philando Castile. Yeah. And then you have obviously George Floyd in 2020. And I'm curious, is there just this huge disconnect between law enforcement and the community? Because obviously that's so not in line with what we're describing about the Twin Cities and what it's like there, that there would be some of the biggest police murders. Or is it that because of the environment in the city, the people of Minneapolis don't let these murders get forgotten, and thus they become the big news story versus maybe the same thing is happening other places and it's not as publicized, or it doesn't inspire a movement the way that y'all are doing?
I think it's some of both. So you don't have to live in Minneapolis to be an officer in Minneapolis, and most of them don't. They live in white suburbs. And so the head of the police union, and this is true in almost every city, that you can have a progressive police chief, but the police union, our police chief union guy was a white supremacist. And he would be quoted all the time in the paper as a reliable source. I always felt like they needed to say, as white supremacists, blah, blah, said, but they didn't. So the police union representing the police, horrible. It's so interesting. I heard MS Now came here and they were talking about why Minneapolis. They were like, what's so great is the relationship between the police and the people. And I thought, who did you talk to? The mayor? Because the mayor says that. But the mayor and the people also don't have a good relationship, people I know. So I'm like, yeah, the police have been out of control. Now, I was down at city council insisting on this separation agreement between ICE and the police. So they didn't help ICE. But also they were supposed to, by the separation agreement, they were supposed to report anything illegal they saw ICE do. Do you know how many reports there were? None. Zero. I mean, we watched them drag people by their face on the ground and no reports, none. I mean, when people are like, and now it's great, I'm like, well, my friend out in California had just gotten a $475 ticket for some really stupid bullshit traffic thing. And I thought, okay, the police weren't doing that here at least. But they weren't good. They weren't good here. And after George Floyd, so many of them got disability because it was so traumatic for them, whereas the protesters got nothing, obviously. And so many of them have left. And maybe they're getting better officers. Maybe there aren't as many white supremacists. I don't know.
Anything that you might see about like, since 2020, the police force of Minneapolis has worked so hard on community relations, that kind of thing is propaganda probably, or it's not your experience.
It's way overstated. They're not as bad as they were. But that's like saying ICE isn't as bad as it was, I mean, I haven't seen anyone dragged by their face recently around here for witnessing, but they're still abducting people, and I'm sure the police are still just being the police. I mean, I don't believe it. I have no reason to. I mean, I'm an abolitionist, okay? So I just don't think it's going to work. I just have never seen it work. And I didn't start as an abolitionist. I've just watched too much for too long now. So there have been people developing alternatives for care, and when I see people be like, yeah, because the police, and really crediting the police with why it went well here with ICE, I'm like, no, did you listen to that woman in the pink coat say that right after, they shot Alex Preddy, the police wouldn't look at her, wouldn't meet her, like, no, they're not connected to the community.
So tell me, well, first I'll ask you this. In your opinion, why was Minnesota targeted by the federal government?
I think because of the uprising after George Floyd. I think they were looking, just like they were in Iran. You look at the language, it's identical language. They picked the wrong place because they were stupid. But I think they saw the uprising, and I think they thought, if we go there, they will burn buildings and we can declare the Insurrection Act. I think that's what they thought. They didn't pay attention to the fact that a lot of the people who started burning the buildings were white supremacists, and it pissed me off when I heard people contrasting, like, oh, they were this way after George Floyd, but now they're good. It's like, that's not what happened. It was two really different times. Because what was scary during the uprising was, similarly to the surge, tons of SUVs with no license plates or trucks with no license plates. You didn't know who they were, setting fires, in your trash can. Like, every neighborhood was on high alert in South Minneapolis then. And it wasn't because of Black Lives Matter, I'll tell you that. So anyway, I think, they didn't really know what happened because the media, even though the media at that point were getting beat up too, they forgot as soon as it was over that the police weren't good guys. So I think they expected a riot. And I read that Stephen Miller said that. And that he really particularly said, go to that neighborhood, because that's the one that'll do it. Right where George Floyd was killed, basically. So, yeah, that's why I think, I mean, sure, he hates Tim Walz. Sure, we defend trans people. Like, they hate us for lots of reasons. But honestly, I don't think they take Tim Walz seriously enough to even hate him that much. I think they just think he's not alpha enough, so they don't care. But I think they really wanted a quick victory, and they wanted immigration to win a PR war. My greatest source of pride is that everyone hates ICE now. And it's because it was so clear how awful they are. They'd already been awful in Chicago and LA, but I don't think people paid attention. Everyone hates them, and I love that.
How did you first realize that something really devastating was happening in your city?
You couldn't go anywhere without seeing these SUVs with tinted windows. I mean, where I live, there was nowhere I would go in a day in South Minneapolis. So the presence, and then I would say the first time I really sobbed about it was Renee Good, because I know that block. She was queer. Her kids went to school where my friends' kids go to school. Like, it just got really super personal then. I'd been doing for a while, my friend tracks. They track everybody who goes through the Whipple building. They used to go through and then just have a hearing. Now they go through, they get dismissed, they walk out the door, feel free, ICE arrests them, and they're hauled off and deported. So that I had been tracking, like, oh, now they're in this jail. Oh, now they've been moved here, like on an Excel spreadsheet. She's been doing that since 2016, but she was like, whoa, it's really picking up. And so I started helping her just because she was drowning in paperwork. I was watching that, and then, I heard their announcement that they were going to send all these people here. And that whole bullshit anti-Somali stuff, I was slapping on a clerical collar and standing behind Muslims. And that happened before the surge, that they were really trashing the Somali community.
Because it's the largest Somali community, is it outside of Somalia, right?
Well, I don't know. There's a Somali museum here that I heard is the largest Somali museum in the world. And it's probably because they've destroyed all the ones there. But yeah, it is a very large Somali community, very integrated. It's been here a while. It's not a new community anymore.
And so then what became your role? You've alluded to, all right, there's new leadership now. What's my place? What ended up happening for you?
I ended up wanting to deliver food to people who couldn't get it, take some kids to school who were afraid to go. I had a note in my mailbox from a neighbor saying, hey, I see by your yard signs that you're probably progressive. We're gathering progressive people in the neighborhood, which is kind of I'm not in Powderhorn. It's not a super active neighborhood. So I'd been meeting with them, and we were really talking about things like making signs and putting them up when anyone in our neighborhood was abducted, like how to be present in all kinds of ways, because it is very neighborhood specific, this work. So I came in through my neighborhood, and then the ICE raided a cafe right in my neighborhood. And so I started helping with that, kids needing rides to school and just going and sitting there and being on dispatch just in case, kind of backgroundy stuff.
So there's all of these protective systems in place, all of these resource systems in place. Can you talk about what the landscape of all of that is?
If you saw right after same day Renee Good was murdered, they went into Roosevelt High School and really tear gassed kids and went in and attacked staff. And that's my neighborhood high school. So they were right in my neighborhood the same day Renee Good was killed. And that school, they organized, and they only wanted people really direct. My next door neighbor teaches there. So they only wanted people who the school already knew to come and patrol. They didn't want other people because ICE was trying to pretend that they were going to come and help. There were networks everywhere. I mean, you could do school, you could deliver food, you could do what's called stationary, where you go sit in a business, you could patrol. I can't think of a single person I know who wasn't doing something. I mean, and I know a lot of old people. I was asking my kid, I was like, how many queer people would you say were involved? Because they've been deep in. They said, I think it's about half queer. the people who responded. I said, how about gender? They said overwhelmingly female, very few cisgender men, which I said, that's kind of sad because men like to think of themselves as the protectors. Like, where were they when we needed them? At least for patrolling, that is what's true. A lot of queer people were already organized in different ways. And so we're out. And, groups like Surge showing up for racial justice, which, I was part of starting after Jamar Clark. And the whole George Floyd Square community has been really active. And then the American Indian movement's really shot up again because they've been arresting Native people. They're Native people. No one knows where they are because ICE wanted permission to be on reservations and they're not getting it. So it's a whole lot of different communities that know each other, are related to each other, but it's kind of like people coming to the theater for Buster. Like everyone shows up. That's what you do. You show up.
What are some of the protocols for the purpose of like slowing down ICE or warning people about it? I know obviously there are whistles and people gathering in the street. Can you describe those scenes and like what other protocols there are?
Every neighborhood had a signal group, and then there were, like I was in a clergy signal group and a this signal group and a that signal group, and schools had their own signal groups, of course, and churches. And there was a registry of license plates, ICE license plates, that whoever was dispatching knew. People were really using their gifts to find out if somebody was ICE. And I'm forgetting part of your question.
Slowing ICE down, like, are there...
Well, that's where the dance party I mentioned by my old house. People would light fires in intersections and stand around them and talk to their neighbors. And for a while, they were building really interesting sculptures in the intersections, out of garbage cans and various things. And the city, was really pissed off about it and taking them away. But people kept building them. Because they drive 80, it's really dangerous what they're doing in the neighborhoods, besides arresting and killing people, but they're also going so fast in neighborhoods where the speed limit's 25. So people were putting up any kind of physical obstacles that they could and so bravely following them because, they'd come back behind and smash people's windows in. It didn't matter if they were actually even arresting someone at the time. It's way better. It's way better than it was. But still, every door has ICE Not Welcome on it. Every business, every church, they're just everywhere. Then, in my neighborhood, they're 4 new someone was abducted here signs. And as I said, I'm in a sleepy neighborhood.
Is there something that you witnessed or seen in 2026 that most impacted you, or something that you think about when you think about the devastation of what's been happening?
I think Roosevelt High School probably impacted me the most strong. It's the kids who just really take me down. What is being done to young people. They are so traumatized. And this kid that I drove, I was teasing him because he never wore a coat, and it was winter in Minnesota, and teenagers in coats. And I was like, come on, it's cold. And finally, after a week of me teasing him, he said, I don't have a coat. And I was like, oh my God. So quickly we got him a nice down coat. But, just the quietness with which people suffer. But another time, he didn't come to school. And I was like, oh, what happened yesterday? And he said, my mom was just too scared to be alone. I just wanted to be home because she was so scared. And just seeing what the kids have to pick up for the parents' fear, I would say that impacted me the most. And I didn't even know it, but when I was in Austin, we went out to eat at a Tex-Mex restaurant, and we came out and there was this Latino family and the kids were running around playing, and I burst into tears. And it was because I realized I had not seen happy brown children in a month and a half. That's where it just takes me down, is the Dilley Center. What is this doing to children, and how will they recover? Children are resilient, but my God. So Renee Good, that's the first time I cried because I heard that, her wife was there and they had stuffies in the car and it just dropped a 6-year-old off. But then when they went right to the high school in my neighborhood and were in there tear gassing and beating up teachers and students. And I just was like, this is my neighborhood. I mean, Anderson Cooper came here and he said, I've been to war zones all over the country, but I never thought I'd experience one in the United States where our own government had declared war on a city. And that was so validating to me to hear, because that's what I felt like, that I lived in a war zone. I see people here and they're not okay. They're really not okay. So.
What else do you feel like people don't know about what's been going on or is going on in Minneapolis that's like not being covered, not being talked about?
Get to know your neighbors. Just know who's around, because if you don't, you're at so much risk when strangers come in and pretend to be your neighbors, like, which is what they're doing now. You know, they're trying to pretend that they live here and infiltrate groups, because, you know, they're down to 8 or 9 arrests a day from whatever they were, 100 or whatever, with their quotas. They were going door to door asking white people who lived in their neighborhood who wasn't white. They were stopping all people of color on the highway and making them prove they were citizens. So I feel like I'm really happy to read about the people fighting the concentration camps where they live. But it's so local. Like, this is not a social media enterprise. This is fully embodied work. You can't feed people by filling out something online and not giving them food. You can give money. Believe me, we still need a ton of money here. There are a lot of people who still aren't working or anything, but or about to get evicted. But I don't know, when I listen to people and they're like, well, we need to vote, I'm like, that is months from now. And it was one day at a time here, life or death for so many people. And it still is for all the people in those centers. So yeah, that's what I'd say is, don't think that by reading the news you're involved. You're not. If your body is not doing something different, you're not involved.
And so by no means are things back to normal.
No. And they won't be for a long time here. Economically, we're wrecked. We lost more businesses here than we did in COVID. So many families are torn apart. The other thing I'm really proud of that came out of here is singing resistance. And I feel like if you don't know where to start, gather people to sing, you know, just gather people and sing. And then it's sort of like the lesbian concerts. You'll be in the room together and you'll think of other things to do, but just come together and sing.
Mm-hmm. That's a long time strategy.
Yeah. I think we're at a point where, you know, when we had a common enemy, we didn't fight with each other. We were too busy, frankly. We just did not have the energy. No one was saying, is that white savior energy? Because no one cared. If you were out, good. For whatever reason, just get out there. And I saw a lot of stuff come down around the No Kings about it's useless, it's useful, you're good, you're bad. You know, just not listening carefully to especially BIPOC people and what they had to say about it. So I hope, what I hope for Minneapolis is that a whole lot of white people who never did anything before have been engaged. And I hope that learning is part of what happens next. I hope for us that we can not just start fighting with each other.
Mm-hmm. I always have that hope for us.
It's a good hope.
Do you feel more of a connection now to the younger generation? Like, have you been able to ease any of the guilt over not passing down the house? Do you still see the connection in sort of the way that the infrastructures that people around you were building, like that it actually has carried into this time? Like, even though, you know, you didn't teach someone how to run Sweet Willa, like there's still an impact.
Yeah. I mean, I think just the way we absorbed things from the labor movement, that we didn't know that history and we weren't particularly interested in what happened in the 1930s, you know. I think history's alive. And, you know, just like I said, I can really feel the fact of the Dakota people in this land. I think that past and present are not separate, even past that I wasn't alive for. And future is where it gets exciting and where I feel like the young people are most exciting, because it's always the young who can see. I mean, you look at any social movement around the world ever, it's been the young people who take the risk to go where no one else can even imagine going, much less go.
Thanks for listening to Cruising. If you like this episode, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. It really helps others discover our podcast. Cruising is produced by a small but mighty team of 3 queer women, Rachel Karp, Jen McGinnity, and me, your host and editor, Sarah Gabrielli. Our theme song is by Joey Freeman. You can support us at buymeacoffee.com/cruisingpod. Follow us on social media at cruisingpod, on Substack, cruising.substack.com, and at our website, www.cruisingpod.com.
Welcome to Mick Unplugged, the #1 podcast for self-improvement and modern leadership. I'm Mick Hunt, your host, and I'm here to challenge your why and fuel your because. This is where leaders, entrepreneurs, and go-getters come to level up. Each week, I bring you unfiltered conversations, game-changing strategies, and the kind of motivation that transforms lives and legacies. I've learned from legends like Les Brown, Damon John, and Robert Irvine, and now I'm bringing their lessons, along with mine, straight to you. From modern leadership tips to creating unstoppable momentum, this is the podcast that redefines what's possible. Hit play, subscribe, and join the millions who've made Mick Unplugged their go-to source for growth and greatness. Because your next breakthrough is just one episode away. This is Mick Unplugged, the voice and face of modern leadership, entrepreneur, and self-improvement. Let's get started.
Goodbye, Kyle.
Did the sound of those words call to you like Pavlov's dog? Then you might enjoy our podcast, Turtle Time.
Every week, you can join me, Riley Hamilton, and my co-host, Amy Scarlatta, as we cover the most pressing Bravo news and dig into the new episodes to answer important questions like, who the hell is Adrian Malouf in this world?
Listen to Turtle Time on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes every Wednesday and Friday.